This is Anna from the Open Knowledge Foundation Germany. Um, Today I do this screen recording for you to give you some background for our project Subsidy Stories EU, where we gather all the data on EU subsidies and how they're spent on member state and regional level. So our project is of course about money in the EU. Normally when we hear about money in the EU, it's about how much member states pay into the European Union, how much it would all cost us. The best example we of course have seen this June when with the big buses going around in the UK and about the 350 million pounds that were sent to the EU. Let's fund the NHS instead. However outrageous that and untrue that saying was, it does show us how it's normally reported by politicians and in the press that the EU costs us money. But, and this is what is constantly shown for the EU, like how much do we put into it, how much does it cost the member state. Well, we now try to find out with this research project as well, how is this money spent? And it's surprisingly, we know very little about that. That is why we first look at the EU budget. The EU budget shows here the allocation of the allocation of money through different funds, how it's spent back into different member states. You see here around all these different funds, and the biggest ones are on the left, the funds for the Common Agricultural Policy, the Common Fisheries Policy, and all the way on the right, the funds for the EU regional policies. Now, we look at the ones that are together called the ESF, European Structural and Investment Funds. That is on the one hand the Common Agricultural Policy, the Common Fisheries Policy, the Cohesion Funds, the European Regional Development Funds, and the European Social Funds. These funds are managed on the European level by the Director Generals for Agriculture, MARE, DG Region, and DG Employment. And there are already big projects around the agricultural subsidies, the farm subsidies project. Go to farmsubsidies.org to see more about that. So we will look at the next big funds, namely the ESF, the Structural and Cohesion Funds. That is the Cohesion Funds, the ERDF, and the European Social Funds. These funds are spent on, are provided partially by the European Union to the member states and to the regional level. And how these are divided is through a complex system of policies, of classification, of priorities, and of classifications of regions that define how much co-financing the EU gives. So already in terms of the policies for the divisions of those funds, these funds are fairly complex. So let me try and break it down for you. First of all, we have the cohesion funds. The cohesion funds has as an aim to make the European Union more cohesive. So to bring the less developed member states, the member states with with a GDP per capita of less than 90% of the EU average, up to the level of the more developed regions. The cohesion funds are provided on member state level and are mainly focused on large-scale or major infrastructure projects, such as a Connect project that's focusing on broadband internet and large infrastructure projects. Then we have the European Regional Development Funds and the European Social Funds. Both of these funds are divided on a regional level. And for that division, all the regions are divided into three different categories. And I will, in the next slide, show you two maps to show you this division more precisely. For now, I will tell you already, there are three different categories of regions. More developed regions with a GNI of the per capita higher than 90% of the EU average, 75% to 90%, which are transition regions, and less than 60%, which are less developed regions. Based on this division, different regions get different levels of funding. All these different subsidies work with co-financing, meaning that the EU provides a part of the subsidy between 50% and 80%, and the member state also has to chip in between 50 and 20%. And so the less developed regions will, for example, get 80%, but also will get are eligible for different types of priorities, different types of a broader set of subsidies, whereas regions, the more developed regions, are mainly eligible for ERDF funds when it comes to smart growth, employment, these kind of funds, but not for the infrastructure funds, for example. So with the broad scope, the topics are innovation and research, the digital agenda, small medium enterprise support, and the low carbon economy. These funds are, how they are divided is set out in these policies and depends on the GDP per capita of either the member state or the region in which category they fall in. And then they are on the member state level, they are given out by the regional or national authorities, by management authorities, so to say. I will get back to that later. For now, let me show you the map of how this is divided. So on the left, we see the division in regions of Europe. These are so-called NUTS 2 regions, and all these regions have gotten a category. As you see, as I just explained, you have the orange, the dark orange regions. These are the less developed regions. The dark yellow regions are the transitional regions, and the light yellow regions are the more developed regions. And depending on this categorization, these regions are eligible for different kind of subsidies and different kind of co-financing levels. On the right, we see which member states are eligible for subsidies under the Cohesion Fund policy. And so we see here that it is most of the countries in Eastern Europe, and Greece and Portugal. These are countries that have GNI per capita less than 90% of the EU 27-28 average. And then we see one light purple there. You have one dark purple and one light purple. That's Cyprus. And that is on the phasing out of support. So that's one to keep in mind if you work on Cyprus. So how are these funds then, how are the priorities for these funds decided? How are these funds divided? First of all, the European Commission and the DGs together decide on, and the European Parliament together, when negotiating this MFF, this multi-annual financial framework that I showed you a couple of slides ago, decide on 11 thematic objectives. And as you read here in this slide, for the entire programming period that we're in now, 2014-2020, there are 11 investment priorities, and these 11 investment priorities, they define for different funds the key priorities. And then, depending on the region's level of development, these priorities will be funded between 50 and 80%. A good example of then what happens then is, as I just showed you here, the DG region and the member states go into negotiations about how these thematic objectives are translated into very specific priorities for that region or that member state. And I have here selected in the data, in the high-level data that the European Commission or the European Commission already opened up and put in a very nice database for us. It shows you clearly how that kind of looks like. So I selected here Poland, as we could see on the in the previous maps. Poland is, most except for Warsaw, is considered less developed, has a number of less developed regions, as you see here on the right side. I've selected here the fund ERDF, for example, and then you see here in the TO short, you see here that there are different programs that then and different programs and priorities, TO short, that are funded under the ERDF. And then you see in the title, you see the title of the specific programs that are coming out of these negotiations about specific priorities for Poland. So this is kind of how that system works. So if thematic objectives, then member states and regions negotiate about what are the priorities in that area, and that is then turned into priorities for that area, and certain programs are developed together and then are then funded. I put here the website address cohesion.ec.europa.eu. Go to that website and look at this is the data on the level of the EU, how it's going to the member state. Have a look at it for your own member state, for the region that you're working on, because it's quite insightful on how this works, and also connects to the data that we are gathering and collecting. I just talked to you about those programs. You can also find these programs and the program descriptions themselves online. And if you're sourcing data, I would really, really advise you to go to the website of the regional policy, and then for your for the region that you're sourcing for the fund that you're sourcing, you can look up. There is a search box where you can look up the exact programs, or for the country that you're sourcing, you can look up all the different programs that are there in that country. So here I made a selection of the link. First, you can go to the website in general, because it has all the information about the policies in general, about the funding, and then you can drill down to the funding in your country. In this, then you can look at the different projects. That's more example projects, and that's why we do what we do, because in these projects, what we then do is not only we are basically enhancing that part, and then the information sources gives you more information. So what you see here on the left, I given you 5 very useful links. First is the general regional policy website, just go through that. The programs is a very important one, because it shows you how these programs are divided, and within those programs, which priorities, how much funding, the different codes. Then there is the important part of the management authorities. A management authority is on the regional or national level, depending on which funds and on which level it is divided, who is in charge of executing these funds. And here in this case, I've selected Poland here. So it's program description, the main objective of a program, in this case Eastern Poland, and then on the right side you see that in this case the management authority is the Ministry of Infrastructure and Development. But here, if you click on that one, you can select for every region and for every program you can select what is the management authority there. Then there is this list of the local website with beneficiary list. That is exactly the list that we have. That is a list where we provided you with a similar list previously of all these different local portals where all the different beneficiary lists are. This list that is here is not as deep into detailed as the list that we have made, because we are really looking at the data itself, and this list looks at the portal, so at a slightly higher level. Now finally, what I find incredibly useful of this website is the glossary. Go to the glossary on the regional policy website, because it describes all the different terms that you will encounter, from programs to priorities to thematic objectives to certifying authority, audit authority, etc., etc., etc. I could all explain that to you, but in detail. But I would actually say go to the glossary once you are sourcing your different data files, if you are curious about what certain terms mean, or if you need to know something in particular. Then finally, that's what I quickly referred to before, the different subsidies are regulated by the different EU regulations, by a complex system of policies and regulations and partnerships agreements. So here, if you want to go into detail about this, you can find the regulation on the structural funds in general, the regulation on the cohesion funds, that is the European, that are the actual regulations of it, and the list of partnerships agreements per country. So I hope you can use all these resources. I hope this explanation has given you some background on why we're trying to find all these different all the different beneficiary lists, why we need to bring it together really to get an insight into how the EU money is actually spent on member state level, and some of the policy background. Have fun sourcing. I hope to see you on the Slack channel, and you can always reach out to us for more questions. Or if you have answers to more questions, know loads about these EU laws and regulations, do contact us as well. And because we are, yes, we are very open. We would love to hear more, learn more as well. So do reach out to us, and I hope we do this together.